So hello. This is the Grant Makers for Education Out-of-School Time Impact Group monthly stakeholder call. My name is Rebecca Goldberg. I'm a co-facilitator of this group along with Kathleen Airhart. This is our monthly call series that started back in, I think, March or April of 2020 during the pandemic. And we've moved to monthly, and these are an opportunity for the grant maker community to engage with the field around current issues and challenges and opportunities. And we have themes every month. And so this month is summer and school community partnerships, because it's Summer Learning Week this week. So it's a great way to cap off this exciting week of events. We did a survey in the spring around the topics and interests and field issues you found to be most important and most salient. And the number one topic was school community partnerships. So when we saw that, we wanted to highlight this exciting national collaboration between National Summer Learning Association and the Chief School Officers, CCSSO, as well as an opportunity that's been presented by the Federal Department of Education around Learning and Enrichment Summer Collaborative. So we're going to learn more about all of these efforts and how they're connected and leveraging one another, how they're supporting states and local providers around summer programming. This morning, our conversation will be facilitated by Polly Singh, who's a Senior Program Officer at the Wallace Foundation. And we have a terrific panel of Laura Johnson from National Summer Learning Association, Kathleen Airhart from the Council of Chief State School Officers, Abel McDaniels from the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education at U.S. Department of Education, and Katie Landez from Georgia Statewide Afterschool Network, as well as Malbert Smith from MetaMetrics. Both Polly and Malbert have been supporting this effort from the funding side. And so I'm going to share information about each of our speakers in the chat. I encourage you to join in the conversation. We'll have some prompts throughout in the chat for you all. And I'm going to quickly turn it over to Polly.
Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on a Friday as we close out Summer Learning Week. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Wallace Foundation, we are a national philanthropy, and our mission is to foster equity and improvements in learning and enrichment for young people and in the arts for everyone. Over the years, we've had the privilege to partner with CCSSO in the area of education leadership and with NSLA in promoting summer learning. So I'm responding in particular, why did Wallace support this partnership? How did we involve? What has been our role in summer? So I'll set that as the stage before I start turning to others. We've been so privileged to work with these two organizations as they come together around a common purpose to support summer learning planning with states. You'll hear more from them later in today's session, both about the work that they've been doing, but also about the partnership to support state planning for summer learning. Wallace's interest in summer learning started a decade ago, and it was driven by a recognition that while the summer months can be a time for learning and opportunity for young people, it is often a time when inequities become more pronounced. In 2011, Wallace launched the National Summer Learning Project in 5 districts as a way to better understand the effectiveness of voluntary summer learning programs that combined with academics and enrichment, and just as important to learn what it takes to do this work well. So there is a body of knowledge to tap on best practice for summer learning. It is well documented that children from low-income families experience setbacks in summer relative to their wealthier peers. We see this academically in many and in many other ways. COVID especially exacerbated many of these inequities, including food insecurity, lack of physical activity, and what worst of all, I think districts are finding that they're missing students. So even more so, this work is so urgent. And now there is also a policy opportunity. There's additional ESSER funding available to support summer programming in 2021, 2022, and 2023. So while we're thinking about summer, there's also an opportunity to take a longer view and to develop an approach for summer learning that leverages multiple summers for the benefit of children, and in the process build capacity within states and districts to do this work well. This work and partnership between CCSSO and NSLA, we know a lot through our work through the National Summer Learning Project, through these partnerships, about what districts can do to support summer learning, but we know less, we don't know as much in terms of what states can do and what states' roles can do. And that is what we're hoping to learn through this partnership between CCSSO and NSLA. I think I want to leave as much time as possible for the folks who, for the other speakers that are on this call. We know that Wallace is not alone in our interest and dedication to summer learning. I see many of you are familiar faces and names as you come up on this call. And so we appreciate the opportunity to learn and share with each of you. And in that spirit, I wanted to also give chance to Malbert Smith, who is also a funder, as Rebecca mentioned, in this partnership. He co-founded MetaMetrics. His bio, I think, will be posted in the chat. I see Rebecca just did it. So Malbert, I'll just turn things over to you and I'll keep the conversation going.
All right, thank you, Polly. My interest in this project really stems from about 4 different perspectives. Number one, in full disclosure, I've been on the board of directors for the National Summer Learning Association for close to 15 years. So obviously summer learning has been near and dear to my heart. Secondly, I'm a big proponent and big supporter of CCSSO. I guess I've been a sponsor there corporately for about 20 years and got to know Kathleen actually back when she was at Tennessee, but now at CCSSO as well. Thirdly, I'm still a professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and the research on summer learning loss is just overwhelming. It's one of the most consistent findings in educational research there is. And fourth, as the CEO of MetaMetrics, this is unusual for a psychometric research firm to say, but I think we test too much in our country. We need to do more with the test we give, not give more tests. So a number of years ago, along with some other colleagues and grants from the federal government, we created the Lexile framework, which is a way of connecting and making test scores more actionable. And so combining all of these for the last 10 years, I've worked with about 30 states with either the governor's office or the SEA in designing and helping them to implement summer literacy programs, basically taking their statewide test scores, connecting them to books and connecting them to public libraries so that we could actually promote reading over the summer. There's great research on this, primarily from James Kim up in Harvard, who's done a lot of the great work on this. But the real excitement I had about this project is I think the SEAs can be more strategic and more thoughtful in designing and implementing too often and implementing summer learning resources and summer learning activities. Too often it's been more of a check the box. Governor comes out, reads a book with some elementary school kids, and everybody kind of says, well, we have a summer literacy program. It takes a year-round sustained effort, and I'm hopeful that with this project that the SEAs can rely on the strength of NSLA and CCSSO to really be much more strategic and thoughtful in designing their activities. I'll yield my time back to you, Polly.
Thank you, Malbert. I think we can keep going. I'd like to turn things over to Kathleen. Can you share a little bit more? What is the role of states in supporting joyful summer learning and enrichment?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Polly. I think, Malbert hit the nail on the head with this idea that states were not intimately involved in summer learning. It was basically left to the locals to figure out what summer learning would look like. And as a result, there were many local education agencies and external organizations that were supported by NSLA throughout the past 20 years on what it looks like to have summer learning. And this is really a first toe in the water on what it could be for states to be more involved in directing that summer learning. So it was actually a great combination of timing, of thinking about these things, and funding from the federal government that has brought us to where we are now. Because of COVID and because of long-term closures, the federal government, Department of Education, is providing just an extra amount of funding to states to support learning and enrichment. Looking at some of the numbers, in March 2020, 13 billion came through the CARES Act. December 2020, another $54 billion through the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Acts. And then finally, in March of 2021, nearly $122 billion came through to states on the American Rescue Plan. And it was that particular group of ESSER funds that it was stated that some of those funds should be designated for summer learning. And I want to look at my notes to get this right, but 1% of, of that 122 billion is to be used for summer enrichment, 1% for comprehensive after-school programs, and 5% to address learning loss. And those funds, in addition to the percentages that I mentioned, any of those funds can be used for summer learning, for summer enrichment, and for accelerating learning for students who have experienced so much loss. There are some parameters by the federal government. The focus should be academic, social emotional learning, and particularly targeting those disproportionately impacted, those students disproportionately impacted. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the Q&A today. But one other thing I wanted to say was that of these funds, 90% are flow through to districts. And of course, the state is in a position to influence how districts are spending funds, and districts are in a position to create opportunities with great partners to really relook at what summer learning could be. In the past, SEAs were involved in summer learning or after school programming, basically through Title IV with our after school programming, which was a minimal amount of funds as compared to what this is. So what we're trying to do in our partnership with NSLA is help states to think about this differently, more broadly, bringing in many stakeholders from the State Department as well as external organizations. But it's a mind shift for states. So we're working through this over the past several months in our partnership.
Thanks, Kathleen. Laura, can you add some thoughts here about some examples of what you're hearing?
Sure, and thank you, Malbert and Kathleen. This is truly, an historic investment from the federal government. And so this is really a chance for us to think differently about how we serve children, not just during the 9 months of the school year. And I'm reminded, and I want to ground us in this reflection, and it goes back to the Maasai warriors of Kenya. They greet each other with not hello or how are you. They greet each other with, and how are the children? And I think this is really a time for us to really kind of focus on the well-being of children. We can talk about learning loss and we can talk about all of the academics. At the end of the day, we're looking at the whole child and how we serve the whole child, the whole community, the whole family. And so summer is definitely a piece of that conversation. And I think at this moment, we have the opportunity to shape a shared vision for how we, again, lift up the well-being of children year-round, recognizing that there are huge disparities even before the pandemic. So this is an opportunity for us to think about this really incredible investment from the federal government to think about long-term sustainability, to think about how we optimize the impact of summer by breaking down silos within SEAs, within LEAs, how we bring the right stakeholders together. And so we're seeing a lot of really encouraging conversations across the country. We have 8 states as part of this summer network with CCSSO that we're looking at this deeply and looking at community systems that can really put a safety net in place so that we are really, again, lifting up the well-being of children year round. So in terms of, creating a framework, states are uniquely, positioned to think about not only what summer can look like, but putting in technical assistance supports to ensure that we're looking at quality, looking at assessment when it comes to summer, as quality is well defined in the summer space. And so really kind of lifting up evidence-based practices and looking at a cycle of quality improvement at the state level. We also know that from the National Academies of Sciences report that data collection during the academic year sometimes ceases in the summer months. So this is a chance for states to really think about cohesively looking at what we should be learning during the summer months about the well-being of children and academic gains. And so a lot of opportunity in this moment.
Can you share a little bit more? I see a question in the chat that's come up in terms of the mindset shift between SEAs and LEAs and what that's looked like. If you've had any examples, you could share a little bit.
Sure. The program that I mentioned previously that was involved with summer learning with states was 21st Century, and a lot of folks have heard of those funds. They've been around for a while, and basically the State Department acted as the provider of funds to locals, with 21st Century going through somewhat an application process, but also a flow through process to districts. And there was not really a lot of involvement in directing what programs could be. It was more so making sure that districts or locals spent the money appropriately as according to the federal guidelines. I think what I'm seeing differently now is states are thinking about this holistically, is what do our students need, knowing that collectively as a state, we've lost this amount of time in learning and in-person learning, and what needs to happen to both help our students learn academically, but also adapt socially and emotionally to what has happened. I mean, many of our students have been impacted by isolation, by missing classes, missing friends, not having those in-person support. So many states looked at summer as a time to bring people back together, bring students back together, and have both time for learning, but with fun, and making an opportunity for students to build those relationships again, for it to be in a different setting than a traditional summer school, which might be desks and rows and catching up on something academically, versus really thinking about it in a way that has not been thought about at a State Department of Education previously. Laura, what examples would you think?
Well, I was just gonna add to the shift that we're also seeing with kind of the rebranding of summer school. I can't say it's a broad sweep, but summer school traditionally has an association with all things punitive and all things focused on remediation. And so we are seeing and have seen over the last years, especially those that are involved in our new vision for summer school, that there is not only a rebranding of the traditional summer school, but there's a real effort to remove the stigma associated with summer school. We have communities, I'm thinking of Rochester right now, that rebranded their summer program, their traditional summer school, to Summer Scholars. We have Summer Dreamers. And so there is a real stigma associated with summer school for students. And so that is an interesting shift that we're seeing, that because language matters. And even though there are things that are mandatory in terms of the law when it comes to catching kids up and having them progress to the next grade, there is a real, I think, effort to, again, look holistically at this and to really think about how we engage young people and also rebrand the whole summer school notion.
Thank you, Laura and Kathleen. I'm going to keep us going. I know we have Katie Landis from the Georgia Statewide Afterschool Network. Katie, can you, I was wondering if you could join us and share a little bit about how the Georgia Statewide Afterschool Network has been supporting the SCA and advising the distribution of funds, providing technical assistance, and all those great best practices that you all are promoting.
Absolutely. Thanks, Polly. Before I actually jump into that, I want to go back and answer that mind shift question as well. Thinking about what SEAs, LEAs, and schools, I think a big mind shift that we're seeing in Georgia, and that I think is really important across the board, is the thought that SEAs, LEAs, and schools, they don't have to do this on their own. There are a lot of partners, community-based programs, who are there to support them in this work and have really significant track records of success. They have capacity and they're there to do this work in partnership. And I think that's a really big piece is to remember as we go through this. One being, GSAN, we are the Georgia Statewide Afterschool Network. We are one of 50 after-school networks across the country. So there is a GSAN in every state, and they can be a tremendous partner to the state education agency and thinking about how they use these funds, but then also thinking about beyond the school districts. And that's a big piece of what we at GSAN in Georgia are doing right now. I'm really excited about our partnership that we have with the Georgia Department of Education. We've been longtime partners with the agency, but then with these funds, the specific funds that Kathleen mentioned earlier, that 1% for after school and that 1% for summer. In Georgia, it's if we're looking at the full scope of what those dollars were, those 1% add up. It's $85 million in Georgia. And what we are working with the agency for a plan of how we distribute and allocate those dollars. And it does look different than what we've seen in the past. Our plan that we're working on, it looks different than 21st century community learning centers. This will be specifically funds for community-based organizations, some municipalities thinking about parks and recreation associations, those organizations who have been doing this work for a long time. And then at least in our state and now in many others, they have not received relief dollars to date. And so this is a really big opportunity where how we can lift up these programs and also encourage these school community partnerships that I'm mentioning. And so what we are in the midst of developing a grant program. We're calling it the BOOST program. It's the Building Opportunities in Out of School Time. This will be using both of our 1% in Georgia. So the 1% for summer and the 1% for after school for multi-year competitive grants to communities who are doing this work and really allowing them to either serve more students, to remove barriers to access, such as enrollment fees or transportation, which we know from parents is the biggest barrier to accessing summer programs. And then also just to expand and enhance the services that they are already offering. Being, as you know, what we're talking about, both the social, emotional, the academic, all of those really whole child supports that either are directly related to academics or those pieces that we know children can't learn unless they have those other elements in place. So we're, again, I say we're really excited about this, but we, also thinking about how this looks different from what we have done or seen before is there's also, plans are still in development right now, but we are working to make sure that there are some real priority for communities, again, as Kathleen mentioned, that are most impacted by the pandemic, but also communities who don't typically have access to our other government funds in Georgia. So there will be some priority for those who aren't accessing government funds and making sure that there is support along the way for applicants and potential grantees who do really great work, but making sure that this system is not as onerous as some other government grants might be, so that we're able to really support community-based organizations as well. And then beyond just the granting process, we're developing a really robust set of quality supports that will be available to all these grantees over the course of the 3-year grants, as well as an evaluation system. To Laura's point about sometimes we're not always tracking some things over the summer. What can we be doing to make sure that we are tracking the success of these programs, both quantitative, but also capturing those really the qualitative. What are those stories, those impact stories that we're hearing from individual families and individual communities, knowing that, yes, there is academic time, there's instruction time to be made up, but there's also a lot of other impact, those social emotional skills and other pieces that these programs are able to offer that we want to make sure we're capturing as well. The last thing that I'll mention as well is beyond this grant program, GSAM, we're also working with our SEA to be thinking about how we as the network can be supporting local districts across the state who are thinking about using their other ESSER funds, those learning loss funds that were mentioned at the local level for after school and summer, because like Laura said, we're seeing a lot of districts across the state standing up new and different summer programs. So how can we work with them over the next couple of years to make sure that they are connecting with their community-based programs? They are looking at some new, innovative, and sustainable practices, knowing that these dollars are not going to always be there. And so what can we do over these next couple of years, not to just provide new services for 3 years, but to build some systems that have some bones that can stay with us after the stimulus funds run out.
Thank you so much, Katie. I think you covered so much in what you responded. I'm going to keep us going. We're doing well on time, but I know towards the end of these, we tend to run out. And I'm going to invite Abel McDaniels. So Abel is a special assistant at the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education at the U.S. Department of Education. As many of you may know, they have also launched a summer learning and enrichment collaborative that actually happened simultaneous as the CCSSO NSLA partnership was getting underway, and is very complementary in terms of the efforts. So I'm going to invite Abel to join us and to speak about the collaborative, provide an overview, and what does the DOE hope to accomplish through this work?
Yes, thank you, Polly, and thank you, Rebecca, for having me. So really, we launched the Summer Learning and Enrichment Collaborative to help states, district education leaders meet the needs of students in this moment, but also support some of those mindset and system shifts to build capacity for summer learning to kind of be a part of what students and families can expect from our education system. So as I believe Kathleen mentioned earlier, through the range of stimulus packages, and especially the last one, there's been a huge influx of funds to support this. And in particular, the last package actually required that states withhold 1% to support summer learning, and that amounts to about $1.2 billion. And we're recognizing that as we're making these investments, we're also asking the field to do something that people are not necessarily accustomed to doing. So the collaborative has been meeting twice a month, roughly, for the past several weeks. And we've been using these sessions to offer different examples and help leaders think about how they might best leverage these funds, but with particular attention to strengthening existing partnerships in their ecosystem or creating and designing new ones where those don't necessarily exist. So we've had pretty high levels of engagement from a range of participants, including SCA leaders, leaders of community-based organizations, leaders from national development organizations, and leaders from districts and schools. And yeah, we've been off to a pretty strong start and are excited to continue and are wrapping up our sessions as the summer comes to a close.
Abel, can you share a little bit more in terms of who is participating from the states, which states, how many, what has the participation rates look like?
Yeah, so we have had one SCA member, at least one SCA member participate from 45 states, which is very exciting to us. But we've had slightly higher levels of engagement from a handful of states over the course of the summer. So we've seen higher numbers of state leaders from Alaska, Arizona, Michigan, Massachusetts, and Oregon in particular, kind of consistently attending sessions. But as I said earlier, we've also had a pretty decent amount of engagement from school districts, community-based organizations, technical assistance organizations. And I'll also add that at the onset of the collaborative, we did encourage participants to connect with their colleagues in their context and in their state to form teams. And we're still getting a sense of how to gauge the extent to which this actually happened.
Kathleen or Laura, do you want to weigh in terms of the teams? I know that you all have also been working with teams in your efforts as well.
I did want to mention the type of assistance we're providing. First of all, we have universal assistance, much like Abel described with open webinars, and have had several of those, one actually in collaboration with USAID that all states and territories were invited to participate in. And I think we were mildly surprised at our first meeting, which I believe was back in April, where every state attended. It was phenomenal that we had that many people show up for a webinar on summer learning. And then in addition to that, we have regular meetings with a cohort of now 8 states on sort of this deep dive and deeper thinking into what summer learning could be as they move forward.
And I would just add, Polly, that's exactly where we are right now with the smaller cohort of states. We are looking right now at the system of summer, the ecosystem of summer, and I have introduced a framework for community system building. And so it's taking our indicators of effective summer community systems and really looking at what does a shared vision look like in a state? What does engaged leadership look like? What does data collection? And it's really the process that we have the pleasure of walking through with Katie and her team down in Georgia, the greater Atlanta community, where they did a full community landscape assessment to really understand where are the gaps in services, what are the community's needs around summer, what do families want, what are barriers to access, whether it be cost or transportation, how many providers are looking and out there available for families to meet the different needs of students. And so right now our states are engaged in their own state assessments of these kinds of community assets and community, wherever there might be gaps. I think we're also looking, as Kathleen had mentioned earlier, it's like who needs to be at the table. And so helping states really think about the stakeholders that should be part of this conversation, not in this moment, but long-term. And so this idea of breaking down silos within the agency, within the local school district, is really a conversation that we're really lifting up pretty strongly, because we want to make sure that we are having cross-sector conversations that are really looking again at how do we best serve the needs of children year-round, including during the summer, and who needs to be at the table, from health and human services to housing to child nutrition to our special education providers, really looking at the whole picture of how do we serve children best during the summer.
This is great. You all are addressing many of the questions that are coming up in the chat, but there is this question about how much do we know right now about what states are planning to enter into initiatives just such as GSAN and Georgia. So you mentioned the 8 states that you all are working with in that deep dive cohort. Can you just name them? Maybe it might be helpful for others to hear.
Sure. It is Arizona, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Oregon, Tennessee, Utah, and Virginia.
And I also wanted to pose to the group, anyone can take this one. What are state plans looking like? Like, what are you seeing in terms of state plans, like early indication? I know that they're coming in their early versions, but what are they looking like? What are you finding? Are there commonalities? Are they very different?
You know, maybe Abel is best equipped to that,
Yeah.
but I would just say, from my quick view of several of the plans, states are wanting to keep things at somewhat a high level to give them the flexibility to plan deeper as time goes on.
Yeah, I would say that there's definitely a range. So of the 7 that we've approved so far, all of them touch on summer in some way, as that was one of the required uses of funds. But a handful of states are doing things a little more specific around summer that might be of interest to people. So Massachusetts is actually using this opportunity to scale up some existing models of summer and vacation time acceleration academies to be able to reach more students in high needs communities across the state, and then offer specific or opportunities for additional instruction in specific content areas to students in need. Utah, which I know has come up a few times, has designed a new grant competition to support evidence-based summer programs in communities, and has a range of requirements around expanding beyond kind of what we might traditionally think of as summer school to really try to support the whole child as a requirement for those funds. So those are just 2 examples.
Yeah, and we just released a document in collaboration with NSLA on funding guidance for states around summer enrichment and learning. And we listed a couple of state examples there. I'll call out Connecticut funding grants to expand summer 2021 programming for low-income children. Georgia, and probably Katie could speak to this better than I, but a boost grant competition with 3-year grants renewed annually on building opportunities in out of school time. New Hampshire, a rekindling curiosity program across their state. Utah is doing competitive grant programming on summer learning and after school programming. And West Virginia, a program called SOUL, Student Opportunities for Learning and Engagement, which provides hands-on, engaging, and interactive opportunities and experiences. So, you know, seeing things differently from states, you know, what I notice, even with our own states in the cohort, is some states are more top-down and providing, you know, this is the summer experience and here are the resources to go with that experience, and others more so like Connecticut and Georgia calling out sort of this opportunity for folks to submit ideas for summer engagement in their respective communities.
And going to one of the questions related to this in the chat around the partnership with others, as we have in Georgia, a couple states that I can just call out, and some of these are ones that were already mentioned. The Connecticut one, that was also done in collaboration between the SEA and the After School Network in Connecticut. Vermont has also had summer grants going out to programs that was managed by the After School Network in Vermont. I believe some other partnerships that may not have launched yet, but are well being discussed, include some work in South Carolina and Arkansas. And so we're not alone in Georgia, but it is another resource that, we really just encourage. We're out here to help as the After School Networks. So any way that there can be encouragement for SEAs to be partnering with After School Networks, we are here to help in big or small ways.
And I would just add that those set-asides for summer and after school were really envisioned to have those funds be used in partnership with CBOs. And so we are really lifting up those conversations within our state cohorts about how to broker those kinds of relationships, to look at the community assets within a particular state or local community so that we can broaden the conversation about partnerships. That is something that we're excited to see happen, but it's not going to all happen this year. We've got 2 or 3 years to look at this, and certainly long term, but that is definitely those set-asides for summer and after school. That is the spirit of them, that we could begin to break down silos and really look at community partners as part of supporting students during the summer.
I've heard a lot about supporting community capacity building and infrastructure. All of you have spoken to it in some form or another. Can you talk a little bit more about it, Abel, in terms of what the Summer Learning and Enrichment Collaborative have been doing specifically around that?
Sure. So we've had sessions that really touch on a lot of the questions and topics that have come up today. So structuring and maintaining partnerships with community-based organizations, re-engaging various populations of disengaged students, meeting particular high needs populations of students' needs. And for us, what we're really looking and hoping to see is this initial summer in our collaborative, putting the issue of summer and summer learning on the map for education and state leaders, but really seeding the start of a conversation. As Laura said earlier, we're not able to kind of build these systems overnight, and we really see this work and this effort as starting and hopefully sustaining that conversation. So we hope that beyond this summer and the next few summers, as we are supporting recovery from this pandemic, that states and districts continue to invest funds in summer learning opportunities. And in particular, those opportunities that take a broader view of summer learning beyond remediation or just catching students up academically, but really supporting the development of the whole child in social and emotional domains. And I guess I just want to underscore a bit of the conversation around the last question. We also think it's very important to have partnerships with CBOs and create the infrastructure that's necessary to have high quality summer learning opportunities at scale. I think it's quite clear, and we definitely recognize states and school districts cannot take on that endeavor by themselves, operating within a silo. So we also hope that the conversations we've been convening this summer, the work that the CCSSO has been supporting, that states are getting a sense of what they can do to support partnerships between their LEAs, community-based organizations, and throughout whatever ecosystem they find themselves in, how they might support this work that's ultimately happening on the ground in sites. So those are just a few things that we're trying to do and hope to see.
Thank you, Abel. I'm going to shift us a little bit, and I'm going to call on Laura next to just share a little bit about what are barriers states and local communities facing in terms of staffing, sustainability beyond federal funding. We've also, the evergreen barrier that's come up around summer learning has been around transportation and access. So can you speak a little bit about that? And then others can chime in, please.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think you called out some pretty big ones. I think what's interesting about this moment coming out of a pandemic, and I'll just start with the staffing issue. We are seeing a lot of teachers, that have done a really heroic job this last year. We've heard them say they're tired, they're exhausted from the last year. The flip side of that, we've heard teachers say that summer is the space that they feel energized and inspired because it does feel different than the school year. And so again, thinking about community partnerships and organizations that really have thought about ways to complement staffing opportunities within a school district is definitely a barrier, but definitely an opportunity, because there are organizations like Generation Teach or PACE that are training teachers or looking at a pipeline for teachers and are using summer as kind of that springboard. So definitely staffing is one. We've heard about transportation. I always, say to folks, we can send a man to the moon, but we can't figure out how to get a child from point A to point B to a summer program in a rural community, or bring a fun experience to a group of students in a rural community. And so transportation is definitely an issue on many different fronts when it comes to our conversations around summer, and bringing collective groups together to really think about how do we use our collective brilliance and resources to come up with a solution to tackle the transportation issue. And Katie could probably address some of this, because so many parts of Georgia are rural, and so would love to hear about how you're thinking about that. But definitely transportation. And we've also talked about cost. We know that an average cost for a summer program is about $288 to $300 a week per student. That is a huge barrier for many, many families. And so how do we, again, lift up affordable options? How do we look at partners like the libraries and parks and recreation centers to lift up affordable options for families? But cost is definitely a barrier to enrollment. I would also say that recruitment right now, I think in the middle of this pandemic, there's still a lot of reluctance in some parts of the country for parents that are concerned about sending children to summer programs in the midst of this moment with COVID. And so that is a barrier of how we communicate with families. How do we build trust, rebuild trust, reconnect with families in this moment? How do we ensure that those safety protocols are put in place to reassure families that summers are important? Children need these experiences, but we need to make sure that our babies are safe, right? That they're safe. So Katie, I'll just kick to you, because I know there's so many other things that you've been looking at as part of this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. And I'll actually, instead of addressing other barriers, I think you hit the big one. Well, I want to lift up one specific district in Georgia that I think has found in a short term, they found some solutions to addressing those. And I'm really excited to see what they come up with for the future summers as well. But Muskogee County in Georgia, so Columbus, Georgia, they have, they created a summer program similar to a lot of districts did. It is more academic focused, but they also realized that they weren't prepared to do this on their own. And really the enrichment piece, the other side of summer that we often see, really was not. in there was not something they were ready to stand up right away. So they did an all call out to community programs across their district, across the county, who offer summer programming. And what they ended up developing is there's some formal partnerships with a lot of programs, not just one or two, but a whole lot of programs. And so then their summer, I'm going to use summer school, their summer program that they have within their school buildings is free for everyone, for all students who wanted to attend it. But then what they're doing, it's just part day. And instead of kind of finding other enrichment that then only goes till 2 or 3 p.m., which we know, myself, I know that does not meet my working parent hours. They then partnered with these community organizations, and the schools are then providing free transportation for any and all of the students who are at their school buildings to these community-based organizations. And they're doing that through some of these, the CARES and American Rescue Plan funds. But then they also are supporting these community organizations with some of those funds as well, so that they can help them to support more of their students this summer than they typically would, and finding more innovative ways to do that. And so I think that's when we're talking about cost and we're talking about transportation as being two of those biggest barriers. That's one way that one county is addressing it this year.
Thank you both. Those are great examples. So we are among funders. Do you have any advice for how funders can lean in and to help, mitigate some of these barriers and challenges? What are some strategies you would suggest? And that's for anyone on this call. Malbert, you can weigh in as well.
Sure, thank you. A couple of thoughts that I'm piggybacking off of a lot of the comments I've read, but one of the challenges and obstacles for the SEA is chief turnover. Back 10, 15 years ago, the average tenure of a state chief was about 8.5 years. Kathleen can probably give you the more exact number, but I think today it's less than 2 years, 2.5 years. So there's constant turnover there. So one idea for the funders is, I think this could be a 3-legged stool instead of the two legs that we have right now. I think it'd be important to include the National Governors Association in the future, because governors often appoint the state chief. It might add continuity into it. It has to become a statewide policy, and it has to be ingrained. And I'm excited about this moment, but if this moment is going to lead to more of a movement, we need sustained funding. And I believe that a friend of mine years ago, we were talking about this issue, and he wrote up a concept that got a little bit of traction called SOS, Summer Opportunity Scholarships. And it was Alan Kruger, my friend, wrote this up. And it was basically, if you qualified for free and reduced lunch, you would also qualify for a summer scholarship that the parent could spend in any way that they deemed appropriate to provide summer opportunities. So I think things like that. I hate that it took a pandemic for us to get funding to do the right stuff. And so we need to start thinking longer than this pandemic, and it needs to be more of a 10-year vision, not a 1-year vision. And the last point I'd make, and it's a point that Laura made, I think the mind shift is changing, that summer school should not be viewed as, or summer activities shouldn't be viewed as punitive. But if we're not careful, that's where we're going to end up. Because if you look today, more and more states are starting to release their test scores. Texas released, Indiana released. Looks like we've reversed 7 years of gains in reading, 3 to 4 years, and depending on what grade levels you're looking at. And what I'm concerned is that in our haste to get the reading and math are so important, but we have to also take care of the emotional well-being of the students. And I don't want to sacrifice one at the altar of the other. I think we can do both. And I would submit to you, years ago, economists got away from just measuring GDP and unemployment and started measuring the well-being of nations. Now, if economists can do that for nations, I would submit that we have the wherewithal to do the well-being of schools as well, and paying attention to that. So those are cautionary notes that I would just leave you with, but excited about this moment, but it needs to become broader than a moment, it needs to become a movement.
And if I may, Malbert, I would like to build on to kind of when you're talking about that 10-year vision, thinking, to your question around what can funders do. I think, right now we have there's more dollars at play than there's ever been to support after school and summer. And so that's not, there's always going to be more need. But what I think the private funding community where they can really step in that I see is that systems building, is allowing us to build something during this time while we have more money in states than ever before to actually do the work. How can the funder community be funding that systems building so that it doesn't just end? Who are those organizations? Who are those partners that are coming together to think through what does this mean in 2024, 2025, and beyond? And so I think that's an important place to be thinking about. Not that the direct service piece is completely covered and we need to forget it, but making sure that we are using this time to spend these dollars well, but then also be thinking about what happens next so we can get to that 10-year vision and actually implement it.
And I would just add to that, and it goes back to what I was sharing earlier, and some of the other panelists have lifted up. I think community mapping is a really important part. You have to know what your assets are in a community and where there are deficits and where there are funding gaps. And so we know that in Georgia, there were a number of funders that supported the community landscape assessment report that really was foundational in helping to see where gaps were in the community. And so I would say that's definitely one area. And the sustainability piece is so key. We have seen in this crisis such incredible innovation come out of it. We had distilleries that were making spirits that shifted to making hand sanitizer. And so this is truly a moment for innovation in this space and really thinking about where the needs are, because those innovations were fueled out of necessity. And there are still so many needs for our kids right now that if we were to bring our minds together and really think about where those big gaps are in needs, I think we'll come up with some good answers.
Yeah, and final remark is sustained change at a state level has to be embedded in policy. So in some way, supporting policy changes that will outlive these 10 years of chiefs who come and go and legislators who come and go, but really deeply working with the policymakers in education is important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, Abel, last word.
Go ahead, Abel. Go ahead, Abel. Last word, Abel. And then Rebecca, take it away.
Yeah, just I want to underscore a lot of the comments made. I think the private funding community can play a very big role in helping convene these cross-sector systems and bring different players together. So just a quick example, we found in Somerville, Massachusetts, the foundation community has really helped create a structure that pulls together city leaders and leaders of various city agencies, school districts, and nonprofit providers. And that structure is able to organize and match students to seats and really high quality summer learning opportunities. And now that that's been convened and sustained over time, funders are actually able to support that system, which in itself supports sustainability. So those are the type of structures that we definitely think can help support this mindset and system shift that we've been talking about beyond this initial investment.
Thank you. So I just want to say a huge thank you to Polly for guiding us through this this rich conversation. To all of our speakers, Kathleen, Laura, Abel, Katie, and Malbert, we appreciated having you here, and everyone on this call. I included in the chat a couple of updates and announcements. Everyone, these calls will remain open to the field. We are going to skip next month, August, for summer vacations, but we're going to ask you to opt in to these calls again, since it's been a while since we cleaned up our list. So there's a link in the chat to opt in. You'll also get an email about that. There's a learning cohort opportunity with the Children's Funding Project to learn about public financing models. You can email me, it's in the chat, if you'd like to join. And for the GFE members on this call, we're going to have a visioning and planning session on August 3rd. We've included a registration link there. It'll also come to you in your email. And then just wanted to alert you that the conference information is online. It's in October. There'll be a couple in-person locations as well as virtual, and there's lots of OST related sessions. We'll be sharing a guide about which sessions are available, but make sure to get registered. And otherwise, want to wish you well. Have a wonderful Friday.